Welcome to the Approaches to Maximizing Existing Transmission Capacity webinar hosted by the National Council on Electricity Policy. We thank the Department of Energy for their sponsorship today. We can go to the next slide. The National Council on Electricity Policy is a so during the webinar is being recorded. It's being recorded right now. Thank you for joining. It will be used for training purposes. Please type in the questions to me anytime in the Q&A box or in the chat box, and we will get those questions to the moderator and to the panelists. So any way you want to communicate with us, we will get it to the moderator, but look for that question and A box and the chat box. After the webinar, the presentation and the recording will be posted to electricitypolicy.org, and any unanswered questions will be sent to the panelists for follow-up. Please join our listserv to get any up-to-date information about us. And on the next slide, I will explain that the National Council on Electricity Policy is a membership organization. Oops, I'm so sorry. First, today we have our agenda, and each speaker will have we have 15 minutes on the schedule here. They'll speak for 10 to 12 minutes each, and we'll get in 1 or 2 questions for each panelist in between each speaker. So please send in your questions as you have them, because they will get directed to the panelists as we are going along here. So please engage. We can go to the next 2 slides, and I will explain that the National Council on Electricity Policy is a peer learning platform for ways for state government officials to learn about new technologies, policies, regulations, and market impacts on the electricity system and state resources. So right now we are looking at transmission and the distribution system and how the evolution is happening as the resource mix is changing. And we attempt to engage all of these stakeholders at the state level. So the state utility commissions, the governor's agencies, the consumer advocates, state energy offices. And again, the NCEP thanks the U.S. Department of Energy for its ongoing support. On the next page, you'll see our executive committee, who is our steering committee, and they represent those groups that I had mentioned on the previous slide. As I mentioned on the next slide, you'll see that we have our annual meeting coming up on coordinated electricity planning, and this really looks at the transmission distribution system interface that we've been exploring since 2018. So today, without further ado, I would like to introduce Chair Ted Thomas of the Arkansas Public Service Commission as the moderator for today's webinar on maximizing existing transmission capacity. Chair Thomas is one of the NCEP Executive Committee members, and he also has been recommended for the FERC and NAREC Task Force on Transmission. Without any further ado, I would like to introduce Chair Thomas.
Thank you, Carrie, for that introduction. We'll proceed right to our panel. Again, if you have questions, please put them in the chat. And we have 3 distinguished guests today. Michelle Mannery is Deputy Assistant Secretary, Energy Resilience Division at the DOE Office of Electricity. Jay Caspery is Vice President of Grid Strategies, and Dr. Babak Inyati is Manager of Distribution Generation Standards and New Technology for National Grid. We will lead it off with Michelle. Please present.
Thank you. As said, I'm Michelle Mannery at the Department of Energy. And one of the things, if we can go to the first slide, please, or the next slide, and the next one. There we go. So as many of you are aware, there's a big focus on the grid with this new administration. I'm not going to read you these bullet points, but one of the big things, especially for this industry, is a 2035 goal of carbon-free electricity sector. That's a big, hairy, audacious goal. But what we've been called in the Office of Electricity especially has been called to really figure out and partner and support how the nation gets that done. So we are called to come alongside industry, come alongside stakeholders, and really fill the gaps where there are gaps and figure out how to get through some of the issues that the industry is facing. As you see, there's a number of items here, and so that is our North Star, our mission of where I'm marching towards. So the next slide, please. So this is probably nothing new from what you heard. Here's some trends, what we've been hearing in the industry, and what's been coming into us is big goals, and we need some big technology changes, as well as some more building of transmission. But in order to reach this goal and have clean generation or clean energy, it could be storage as well, and distribution as well. But those big goals will take everything you have in your toolkit. It'll take getting the most out of your existing grid. And I'd say that's the number one thing, is how do we find things, whether it be technology, which we're going to talk about today, or other types of visibility tools or markets. What is it we need to get the most out of our grid today, and then build where necessary afterwards? The goal is to find the most efficient and kind of balanced and fair approach forward. And so it's going to take everything in the toolkit. Next slide. This is complex. If this was easy, it would have been solved a long time ago. This is a complex issue. And why I showed this slide is this a picture of the grid, and different colors mean different voltages on the system, different capacities of the lines. But what's really important here is one size does not fit all. Because the grid has developed over time, has different levels. I mean, that makes sense with population centers and topology. Not everything is a one size fits all, and we recognize that. However, some of the technologies really do enhance. There's a few that are one size fit all, but it really depends on the grid and where you're looking at it. When I say transmission, I wanted to say as well as distribution and everything in between. The goal is, how do you get the clean energy to the user, the end user, the consumer? Next slide. So I'm just going to hit a couple of these. I'm not going to go through all these slides, but I wanted to share with you what we've been seeing in the Office of Electricity. We held a symposium, a transmission innovation symposium on May 9th. Here it had a number of white papers, but it really did look at the 5 different categories, or the sub bullets on the last bullet. So grid operations, distribution and transmission operations, AC, automatic control systems, hardware, and economic analysis and planning tools. And so what it was trying to do is get from the industry and the stakeholders kind of what are the issues out there and how do we tackle them. And I'm just going to hit highlights of a couple of these. So next slide. Okay. You're going to put all that, all those megawatts of, and it says renewable generation. And I would say it's not only renewable, but it's carbon-free generation. And you're going to put all that on the grid. It's going to take some more grid. It's a different, this generation's different characteristics. It's intermittent. And so it's a very different approach. Now, so heard that loud and clear, that if you want that, you're going to have to do that. Now with that, as you can see the R&D priorities here, it's also, can you put it, how much can you get on your existing grid? How much, because generation is being decommissioned, whether it be coal or some nuclear or something like that, and new generation is coming up, can you use your existing system to put as much of that on the grid as possible? Next slide. And you're going to see a theme here. So dynamic increase in wind and solar, they have a very different profile characteristics, because when the sun's up, it's great. When the sun goes down, it's not much use by itself. And it can be curtailed. So when the sun's up, if there's not a need, it can be curtailed. And so the flexibility of grid operations, that's a key thing. And with that, the grid operators need technology, and they need visibility, and they need different type of tools in order to operate the existing grid. Yes, and then the next one on this, time. I don't know how many times by folks not in the industry saying, why does it take so long to build transmission? Can't you make it go faster? And I'd say here, it depends on those of you who've been through it, the process and what stage you're at. And yes, One of the things that Office of Electricity is doing is partnering with some of the other federal agencies and looking at where we can combine our processes or get more efficiencies out of the permitting process on our end. And so we do have some items to look at that, as well as the R&D. So we also have the R&D, and you see the dynamic line ratings and power flow. It's just getting more out of your existing system, and as well as some of that technology that allows easier integration of intermittent resources into the grid. Next slide. Data. I think this is something that is not in this industry, but it's all industries. Data also can be a great benefit if you use it wisely. Data in itself doesn't do anything. Data organized well and have tools that actually give the operators and give the planners and give folks more insight into what's happening on the grid is important. And you see this in your planning, which is your second sub-bullet, your contingency analysis. And this is an art in itself. It's how do you take all that data that we get off the grid and help give some visibility tools forward-looking as well as real-time in order to help optimize the grid and not hold back capacity because you don't have any for contingencies because you don't have any visibility, but really get squeeze that last megawatt out of the grid. Next slide. Yep, control capabilities. I think this is one that people forget, but you can put things on the generation side with the control capabilities that are really effective here. And so you can see in this first issue, the control capabilities, that is one thing that when the industry is thinking about siting and the rules on interconnection, those control capabilities can make all the difference to a grid operator because it has, like we said before, between data and others, it has more control over it, which means it can optimize the system more. And then load. Load, we are not used to this industry. This whole industry and grid was built upon this big generation goes to load and it goes one way. But we're in a new world now. So it goes through the transmission to the distribution. This is a new world where your distribution and your transmission and your load are all playing a part now. And so it's really looking at, to help the transmission, you need to look at the distribution end and the consumer end. Big one I think you hear right now is electric vehicles and where do you place those? How do you place it? How it's not just, and how can you use those to help optimize the grid? And what are the types of tools, the data, the requirements that are needed to do that? And so you see in the R&D priority, not only improving the modeling, but also I'd say incentives as well. And so I'd add on to that. So this is really R&D focused, but I would say markets and incentives and product design, I would say on that really help kind of marry that large generation, transmission, distribution load and what load can do back, especially with a lot of the solar panels and batteries and stuff like that, what that can do back. And so it's really taking those different quadrants that were before isolated and looking at them as a whole across the process. And then I believe the last slide. And then we have, distribution systems. So we've talked about transmission a lot. The world where transmission distribution come together is big. And so that's something that we used to plan separately. Now you have to look and plan and understand and coordinate between the transmission and the distribution system. And as well as that generation located within the distribution. So behind the meter, the large meters, stuff like that. Next slide. So that wasn't my last slide. So I'm just going to hit, complexity, new technology integration, nothing we haven't said before. And so I think these are a couple items that just, it's a variation of the same theme that we are looking at. Next slide. Okay, so what is Office Electricity doing? So first, just to remind folks, we actually have some current authorities that we can do. So we issue presidential permits, and those are permits for transmission that goes across borders. So whether it be Canada or Mexico. We actually are the lead in that integrated interagency pre-application, or IIP is. And so really that's where I'm looking at how we make that process more efficient and find out the gaps there. And then there's also energy corridors. This we haven't had to use in the past. Well, I shouldn't say that. We have used it, but limited. I would say this is one we pull out as the last resort. This is one that if the region can't figure it out and there's issues and that stuff, and we need to come in and help partner with the region in order to get something built, we do have this authority. National congestion studies. This is one that we are looking, it's not just, we're changing this a bit. Well, so we're not just on existing congestion, but we're actually looking at future congestion as well. That if you're going to put some of these scenario-based, all this carbon-free resources on the grid, what's it going to do to the grid? This is one where we don't do it alone. We partner hard with the utilities because they have all the data, and the folks, the industries, and the planning organizations and all that on the ground. You will be seeing us out there a lot more, actually having workshops, working with folks to try to figure this out, as well as, and I'd say this is folks that are in the Western Area Power Administration and Southwestern as well. There's section 1222. Western is also one that it has a variation. It's called the TIP program, where they partner with third party to get things built, reinvigorating that. Western already has that authority. They already have some borrowing authority designated towards that. And so it's really invigorating these type of programs that haven't been needed in the past that could be needed today. So to wrap up, kind of next steps, next slide, please. Next steps. So this is the thing, I'm setting the panel up. You're going to hear a lot more about the technology, but we are looking to partner with industry to find ways to tackle issues. I know I just read that bullet, but it really is about partnership. It's about finding the gaps, finding where we can help, and that could be through, hey, something's stuck in permitting, or could you help us pull states together, or something like that. But that is where you're going to see us a lot more active in the communities and in the industry to find out where we can help move things along. Thank you very much. And with that, I'll turn it back to you, Mr. Thomas.
Thank you, Michelle. Of course, if you have questions, please feel free to ask. I do have one. When we think about dynamic line ratings, typically in the utility world, we divide between operations and planning. I know with operations, when you're operating the system, is a little different than planning, because planning, you're usually looking at the outlier scenarios. What do you see as the potential on the planning side for dynamic line ratings?
Yeah, that's a good question, and you are right. Operations takes in real-time data, such as weather, weather, load, all that stuff, and takes that. Planning, this is a new world, and so the kind of traditional planning, as you look at the either N-1 or N-2, first or second contingency, you plan the worst case, and then you just hold things, and that's what you do. It's a single point worst case. I think in here, it's helping give the tools and just the methodology and the approach to help planners look at and how you use the dynamic line ratings and where is it appropriate. This, I think, is going to be a feedback loop, and it's something DOE helps kickstart and really look and do pilot projects, invest with the labs, because we have a big partnership with the labs, the DOE labs. And so I think it is developing the tools and the methodologies and the approaches that can actually work and to help planners shift their paradigm and be comfortable with planning in a dynamic line rating world.
Thank you. And in response to, I'm sure these slides will be available. I don't know how to do that, but I have a question in chat regarding slide availability. I'm sure they will be.
Yep.
Thank you. Next, we will hear from Jay Caspery of Grid Strategies. Jay.
Thanks, Chair Thomas, and thanks to NARUC, and thanks to NCEP. It's a pleasure to be here. Hopefully you can hear me okay. I'm going to assume so unless somebody sends me a chat. It's an honor to be here. I want to talk to you. Let's go to the next slide. Talk to you a little bit about a special study that I've had the privilege to be involved with. Many of you, I saw the registrant list, and many of you have seen a subset of these slides. This is kind of the Reader's Digest version of a deck that's been out floating around, and various presentations have been given all over at FERC technical conferences, at state commissions, at IEEE events, and many other things, especially SPP working groups, and actually talking with SPP leadership in some of the regional state committee, as well as cost allocation working group on trying to get this topic in front of them next. But this study started last fall when I joined Grid Strategies. Prior to that, I was with Southwest Power Pool for about 20 years, and my latest position was over research development and tariff studies. So this study that was done by the Watt Coalition was right up my alley. Let's go to the next slide. And when we do that, I want to give special thanks to the Brattle Group, as well as the Watt Coalition. The Watt Coalition, the members are shown on the next slide, but we'll get there later, sponsored this study. And it was done, and I need to give some kudos to Bruce Tushita. Bruce and I have been doing tag teams on this study on a much bigger deck that dives into a lot more details for people, just to make sure they understand the scope, the background, the approach, as well as the results and kind of what it means. But last fall, the Watt Coalition sponsored this study to look at the SPP generation interconnection queue. They were focusing on the queue that existed in Kansas and Oklahoma. And at the time, there were about 9,000 megawatts of new renewable projects, almost exclusively wind, but some solar, that were in the queue just waiting. And the question was asked, can we use GETs, grid enhancing technologies such as dynamic line ratings, advanced topology optimization, as well as advanced power flow controllers to help integrate these projects that were kind of stuck in the queue? We did some analysis, and we're looking at 2025 models that are based on real 2019 and 2020 models. So one of my comments I'd like to make is, this webinar is talking about approaches to maximize the existing transmission system. I think you need to maximize the benefits of the existing and planned system, because we know what projects have been approved. We know what the grid's going to look like for the next few years. I think there's big opportunities to take advantage of grid technologies, grid enhancing technologies in the near term as we build out the grid of the future, as we take outages that deal with aging infrastructure. There's going to be a lot of extended outages to rebuild lines and repair and upgrade lines. Grid enhancing technologies can help us manage congestion and constraints during those outages. So let's go forward. The link at the bottom there shows you where the full report is, as well as a video if you want to watch an hour-long presentation about this whole study. But let's go forward to the next slide. If we can, talk a little bit about the overview. I mentioned what the grid enhancing technologies were, and I thought that was a great question about talking about dynamic line ratings and how we could use that for operations as well as planning. I'd like to dig into that a little deeper after Babak gives his comments. But we see grid enhancing technologies as a way to complement new transmission, to actually bridge the gap between permanent transmission expansion solutions, as well as improve the benefit to cost ratio of a portfolio of new projects that are already approved and in the plans. This study focused on 3 technologies: advanced power flow controllers, things like smart valves that are built by smart wires that actually inject voltage in series to facilities that either increase or decrease the effective impedance, apparent impedance of the facilities. And that allows more power to be pushed through lines that are underutilized, or increases the impedance and then decreases the flows on overloaded lines. So we can actually push and pull power on the grid. It's a network. We need to find a way to take advantage of the high capacity elements above typically the high voltage system, which is a constraint in a lot of operations. Also looked at dynamic line ratings, a way to adjust and get more appropriate, accurate ratings of transmission lines based on actual conditions. And the biggest factor there is wind speeds. And in the models that we used here, we actually had real 2019, 2020 models. We knew the wind conditions throughout the system. We made some conservative assumptions about how the direction of the wind and the speeds, and even limited the ability to push more power down existing lines at about 20%, which is very, very conservative based on actual operations and actual research, which shows, I think the latest research I've seen is over a 2-year period, DLR can actually increase the capacity of transmission lines about 30%, which is tremendous. And even if we get 10 to 15 to 20%, it would make a lot of capacity available and avoid a lot of curtailments. The last technology we looked at was topology optimization. This is software like Waze that you use to find the best route to go to commute to work or to go on vacation, so you can avoid the construction issues on the interstates, as well as wrecks or whatever, accidents, things that are causing constraints on the system. The software will tell you what to do, and topology optimization will do the same. So it's a great way to think of it. It helps you look beyond your system, typically as a transmission owner, because the actual best switching operation may be 1 or 2 systems away that would actually force the flows up on the extra high voltage system and get more capacity and less constraints. So let's go forward, talk about the study approach. So what we did, we wanted to look at the combined effects of these 3 grid enhancing technologies using actual SPP models and actual generation queues. We broke the snapshots of a calendar year in 19 and 20 into 24 sets of data, looked at wind curtailments on the SPP system, and modified and picked snapshots that were representative of the system. We didn't want everything to be in the spring nighttime hours, so we had seasonal models. We had at least 4 seasonal models for each season, as well as different times during the day, you know, late afternoon, early evening, morning hours, to make sure we got a representative sample of the actual conditions on the SPP system. We updated those models to reflect the current queue, as well as announced generation retirements, topology changes in terms of upgrades, as well as load changes. And what we wanted to do in these models, and there's a lot of security constrained optimal power flow, so a lot of engineering analysis that was done to look at, could we add more renewables that are sitting in the queue as a result of deploying DLR as a first pass. And we went through several iterations to do that. Then we looked at adding advanced topology optimization, did the same thing, and then added finally advanced power flow controllers into this to see how much value could we create in terms of production cost savings, as well as jobs, local benefits, environmental benefits by doing these simulations. So let's go forward and talk a little bit about the results. Top right, you can see the queue, which shows that in Oklahoma, there's about 5.8 gigawatts of wind that's sitting in the queue. There's a little more than half that amount in Kansas, 3.4 gigawatts, and a little bit solar in both. A total of 9.4 gigawatts of wind and solar renewable resources that are waiting in the queue that aren't moving forward because of inadequate transmission and current reliability requirements. We didn't want to change the reliability standards. We just wanted to see if we could deploy technologies to get more out of the current planned system. And in the model on the bottom left, you'll see that of that 9.4 gigawatts, we could integrate about 2.6 gigawatts of that with current plans. Now, if we started adding the grid enhancing technologies again sequentially and getting to a good steady state at the end without violating any reliability standards, we could see that we could add about 2.4 gigawatts of more wind in Oklahoma and about 200 megawatts of more wind in Kansas, a little bit more solar in Oklahoma for a doubling basically of how much wind could we integrate in the SPP footprint of Oklahoma and Kansas by deploying grid enhancing technologies based on actual models, looking at 2025 conditions and maintaining the reliability requirements. We weren't going to have N-1 overloads. We weren't going to have inadequate voltages on the system. So this is purely looking at reliability standards. So pretty significant. I'm an engineer and I expected to see a pretty big improvement in the amount of renewables that we could integrate with GETs, but I didn't expect 2 times. And despite that, these are very conservative assumptions and very conservative models. So I'm very confident in these results. They have been validated by SPP staff as being reasonable. And so we want to get the word out to talk a little bit about the study and the results. So let's go forward. So what are the savings? So we could integrate 2.7 gigawatts of more wind, which is about 9 terawatt hours of energy. Most of that is all wind energy, a little bit more solar, but grid enhancing technologies not only help avoid curtailments of the new wind, but also the existing wind in the SPP footprint. We estimated that working with the vendors of the software, we estimated that it would cost about $90 million to deploy the technology in a matter of months. Annual cost to operate it would be about 10 million. So let's look at the benefits side. If you look at the 9 terawatt hours of energy, we priced that at basically $20 a megawatt hour, which is higher or lower than the average LMP on SPP system. That'd be $175 million worth of annual production cost savings associated with freeing up this energy that right now is bottled up because we don't allow grid enhancing technologies to be part of the planning portfolio and solutions. But it's not just production cost savings. There's lots of jobs, tens of thousands of short-term jobs, hundreds of long-term jobs, as well as significant carbon emission reductions, as well as local benefits in terms of land lease payments and tax increases associated with the deployment of 2.7 gigawatts of new wind and solar farms in Kansas and Oklahoma in 2025. Let's go forward to the next slide, if we can. So on the left, we extrapolated the results across the nation. Kansas and Oklahoma represent about 1/30 the generation in the nation, so we scale things up. And if we would scale these results up in terms of the benefits of deploying GETS within the US, we'd see about $5 billion worth of production cost savings, 90 million tons of lower carbon emissions, which is equivalent to all the internal combustion engine cars sold in a calendar year. We estimate about $1.5 billion of local benefits in terms of taxes and revenues, hundreds of thousands of short-term jobs and 20,000 long-term jobs, all for an investment of about $2.7 billion and an annual operating cost of $300 million. So on the right, we talk about this $90 million. If you look at the cost of that to enable 2.7 gigawatts of new renewables, that equates to about $34 a kilowatt. If you compare that to the cost of a new onshore wind project, which is probably around $1,300 to $1,500 a kilowatt, you know, that's less than 2% of the estimated capital cost. So this is kind of a no-brainer. You get lots of benefit for very little incremental capital investment if you're a developer. So let's go on to the next slide. And this is just some details. I don't want to really get into this other than we looked at DLR, we looked at advanced power flow controllers, and we looked at topology optimization. These were the results of the models and the optimal simulations. You can see that most of the devices are installed at the 138 kV level, whether it's topology control, whether it's DLR. If it's advanced power flow controllers, it's mostly at the 161 kV level. These devices are not at the extra high voltage system, because that's what you're doing is managing the flows on the lower voltage constraints to force the flows on the higher capacity grid. Let's move forward to the next slide and I'll wrap this up. This is just an outline of the presentation, which is available at the link at the bottom. There's significant details here. I really appreciate your attention. I think I've got one more slide with my contact, and then I'm going to hand this over and look forward to your questions, and appreciate your attention to this, this important topic. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. A couple of questions from chat. First, how would this changing of line capacities affect existing studies for interconnection?
That's a great question. Right now, some things like advanced power flow controllers, smart wires, to me, they should be part of the solution set if you look at the GI or reliability study. Some of these other technologies may be more applicable and beneficial in real time, especially dynamic line ratings, which kind of led to the question you gave Michelle earlier. The one thing I do think is, even though DLR can really help operations and markets in real time as well as next day, maybe even a few days out, because you can forecast ambient conditions. But the big thing, in my opinion, is collecting the data that's used for dynamic line ratings and using that data to have better static long-term planning ratings, as well as increased awareness about the condition of assets. So you know when you need to replace conductors, for example, that are approaching the end of their life. So great question. Some of these apply easier.
Do we lose me or do we?
He's frozen for me. Let's turn off your camera and see if that helps. For Jay. I think, oh, do we have Jay back?
I do not yet hear him.
I think we maybe should move on.
Okay, we have a lot of great questions, but we will move on till we get Jay back. Next, we will hear from Dr. Babak Inyati with National Grid. With all of our panelists, their full bios are on linked in the website. Dr. Inyati, please present.
Sure, thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Thanks for the opportunity to speak to you today. So next slide, please. And next slide. All right. So before I get into, my role in this presentation is more like to talk about the field deployment, the utility implementation of the DLR and power flow control devices and solutions that we have already implemented. However, before we get into that, I want to give you this big picture of what the 21st century electric network means to National Grid. So what we mean by 21st century basically electric network is basically the network that we have real-time data, digital data to make better decisions and lower the cost to serve. Okay, so that's the transition we're making from the traditional utility network and operations to the new intelligent electric network. And in order to get there, National Grid has deployed many new technologies to basically enable that mission. And of course, one of our missions to deliver clean and affordable energy to our customers. I kind of categorize these efforts into 3 different categories to give you a good perspective on what we've done so far. So starting from the left, more like focusing on real-time intelligence, and so that you know there are 2 different categories in that real-time intelligence section. Online monitoring is basically the technology that we install on our existing assets to look at the health of our, say, lines and transformers, and to get better estimate on how or better picture on how our assets are doing in terms of their health, and when we should maintain them. What's the we're basically moving from scheduled maintenance to condition-based maintenance, so we can make smarter decisions and expand the life of our assets. And also digital substations we've been deploying for many reasons. One of the main reasons, basically, taking less time to build these substations with smaller footprints. It gives us better visibility and control over our substations. We have planned that in the next 10 years, we're going to digitize over 170 substations, and that gives us about like 25% capital savings. So these are all great steps to make sure that we give we have better visibility over our asset in terms of control and operations. And the next category, more like new tools. So what are we doing in terms of adding new capabilities to our network and operations? So technologies like artificial intelligence, machine learning, robotics, and intelligent design for the substations. So more like image analytics and using robotics for some of the applications that currently we have some challenges. So like robots can help. One of the applications, I can give you an example, one of our HVDC substations. This robot that you see from Boston Dynamics, it's called a Spot robot, is now operating there, and goes to areas where human cannot go due to, during basically system operate, while the system is on, human cannot attend that firestall valve faults due to safety issues. A robot goes in, takes some pictures, we have like IR cameras mounted on the robots. It gives us better visibility over our asset, the condition of our asset, if there are any issues that we can maintain to avoid any major significant system outages. In the third category, renewable integration, we've been deploying technologies like energy storage and power flow controller. So I will touch on the power flow controller, one of the projects today that we have worked with smart wires. But our goal in general is to, as I said, to make sure that our system is ready and we're utilizing all the capacity in the system to deliver that clean energy to our customers. So next slide. So moving on to the concept of dynamic ratings. National Grid deployed this technology on its transmission line, and in a smaller scale. We haven't done it for our entire network yet, but today I'm going to share some of our findings. All the information you see are like from real field data, so this particular technology that we worked with, Line Vision, this solution is installed on a 115 kV line. It was in service, was commissioned in 2019, July of 2019. The installation is very straightforward. No outages needed. It's basically the sensors are installed on the tower, and with the LiDAR, it looks at the line tag and all the conditions that would impact the dynamic rating of that line. Some of the challenges that we have faced, of course, number one is cybersecurity. In general, utilities are concerned that as we add more and more digital sensors to our network, of course, cybersecurity becomes a serious concern. And so to address that, we've been collaborating with Idaho National Lab to go beyond, the ISO 270001 requirements. Are there any additional, basically, requirements that needs to be implemented in terms to make sure that our system remains safe and secure from cyber perspective? And the other challenge that we've faced is basically abilities of the ISOs to accept and utilize the data, the DLR data. So DLR, I'll talk about that later with some more examples, but DLR gives you the real-time data and also forecast. I understand that the current system operations, we don't make emergency decisions all the time with, we meaning ISOs. And so it's more like day-ahead operation or longer term, the decisions or the planned operations you have. So I think that the first step for DLR adoption would be adopt that forecast capability. And because I'll present later that, that gives us a lot of opportunities in terms of optimized operations. So far, that adoption has been a concern for utilities in general. The lessons that we've learned so far from this project, in average, about like 31% of the line capacity increase compared to ambient adjusted rating. Okay, so I know there's a lot of, there's this FERC-NOPR on AAR adoption and some mechanisms to adopt ambient adjusted rating being discussed thoroughly in the industry. However, our data shows that actually going beyond that and implementing dynamic line rating, that gives the additional 31% capacity, which is huge. And of course, like this additional capacity opens up more room for clean energy delivery. And some areas, that you have congestion, and the line rating is causing that congestion. I'm not talking about other assets. You may have a different equipment causing that congestion, but if it's the line rating, dynamic line rating or DLR may show that that congestion actually does not exist, or it can be relieved. So, so those are the potential lessons that we're learning from this project. Next step, identify more opportunities. We've already done that in our New York electric service territory. We've identified 2 lines that are close to wind turbines to expand this DLR deployment. And so there will be EMS integration and operations as well that needs to be that is planned to be deployed as well. So next slide. So let's get to some field data. So this is the sample information that I'm sharing with you. So we're comparing DLR with ambient adjusted rating and static rating from March of last year until July of this year. The data shows that DLR exceeds the static rating for like 94 to 97% of the time. So there are some times, as you see, the blue line goes below red. Recorded DLR also shows that we have, as I said, 31% increase in line capacity over ambient adjusted rating. And also, so 1 second, sorry. And also the DLR shows that 47% we have in line capacity increase compared to static rating. And if you want to compare ambient adjusted rating with the static, we're seeing 11% increase. So look at the difference between DLR increase versus AAR increase compared to static. Next slide. As Jay mentioned, and I highlighted in my intro, DLR gives us real-time and forecast. And forecast has a higher chance of being adopted in operations, both market and system operations. Our sensors give us the same level of information, and I'm comparing now DLR with the forecast. So you see that the forecast follows that DLR with a good trend, right? And because our assumptions for forecasts are more conservative, we're seeing a good safety margin. So you rarely see a forecast actually increase DLR. So this tells you that if you do adopt forecast, the line will still remain safe. And the previous slide, we saw that forecast still, gives. I'm sorry. The third bullet point here, it says forecast gives 26% increase in line capacity compared to the 11% AAR that we had in the previous slide. So the message here is forecast rating should be utilized for the day-ahead market operations, and again, it shows a good safe margin for for consideration and operations. Next slide, please. Perfect. We talked about wind integration. So I put this slide here. I'm not going to spend too much time on it, but just to give you some information on the impact of wind. As you all know, so when the wind speed increases, you're going to have the line capacity goes up as well because the temperature goes down. So I got the top right curve comes from a report that was published by NYSERDA. So this says the typical wind turbine, of course, it's going to be design specific, but a typical wind turbine will start to produce power at 3.5 meter per second wind speed. Okay, and if it's a rated output power, we're talking about close to 14 meter per second. So the data that we got from our transmission line, we put what I did was just let's look at the data for any rating above above the line where we have 3 meter per second wind speed. Okay, so the blue line you see is for DLR for wind speed 3 meter per second and above. And this shows actually 60% increase in line capacity. That is huge. It's a big number. And back to the point where Jay was making, moving static ratings, as you see, when in the planning process, if the line is close to the wind turbines, you know, it's always exposed to higher wind speed. This data shows that yes, there's a possibility to actually move the static rating up, slightly up, to allow more capacity in the planning process. However, you may install even without considering the wind speed, you may install a DLR on a particular transmission line, and you see that the DLR never goes below static. So that's another chance that you can increase the static rating in the planning process as well. However, the adoption of DLR in the operations is higher chance than planning because of the not being able to forecast the future temperature. Next slide, please. Perfect. So I wanted to quickly also talk about another project that we're currently deploying with smart wires. This is with the power flow control device. The mission, well, this was recently commissioned February 2021, so I don't have a lot of data to show you in terms of savings and all that, but the mission is to move from where we are right now with no control over the magnitude of our power control, our power flow, and just considering traditional line upgrade solutions, which can be costly for our customers, and conservative decision making, because again, a lack of control over power flow, to where we want to be, where, you know, we do have the control over the power flow of that line, and we can potentially defer capital investment by, you know, deferring the line upgrades, which again impacts our customers' electric bills in a good way. And this basically opens up the opportunity for like making smarter decisions and allowing more clean power flow through our transmission lines. With that being said, look at the next steps. We're in the process of evaluating technology. However, we have done some preliminary studies, and those studies show that this technology, actually by itself or in combination with energy storage, can be a cost-efficient solution for some of our transmission reliability issues. And those reliability issues were caused due to like load growth or addition of or high penetration of PV generation on our network. So we were seeing some thermal violation in our transmission lines. So this can be is considered as a potential solution, as the studies prove that so far. But hopefully in the future, I'll be able to share some field data as well. Next slide. I think that's my, yes. So to conclude this presentation, dynamic line rating, of course, maximizes the existing line capacity, so that needs to be considered in our operations and potential planning. Also, forecast is available, so that's a great chance to be adopted in operations. And congestion relief is one of the biggest benefits of DLR, so definitely consider DLR in areas where you have congestions on the grid, and line rating is causing that congestion. Cybersecurity, take that very seriously, especially if these DLRs are going to be connected to EMS. And I'll be happy to share our experience later. Contact me directly. We've done a lot of great work with IDO National Labs, and adoption of DLR with ISOs. That's considered as a challenge, but there's a solution to that by starting the adoption with day-ahead forecast data. So and with wind power integration, DLR is one of the key tools in the toolbox. So please don't forget DLR in deployment in areas where you have high amount of wind and wind generation. And last but not least, smart wires, a smart valve project solution should also be considered a tool in the toolbox for some of the thermal violation reliability issues on the transmission network. So next slide, I think that's basically my, yeah. So if you do have any questions later on, you can contact me via email or phone as well. Thank you.
Thanks for your presentation. First question: to what extent is the technology already deployed on your system? Is this a demonstration project? Is this a limited thing, or is this being gradually
So the one
deployed
that I
on the entire system?
present, Yeah, that's a great question. So the one that I just presented the data from, so yes, that was a demonstration project. That was evaluated. The results were very promising. So we'll move to larger scale deployment. And as I mentioned, the 2 lines that were selected, they're like the first step for larger scale deployment. The lines that are in our New York electric service territory that are close to the wind turbines.
And the wind speed is what decreases the line temperature that allows more throughput. Is that correct?
So higher wind speed, you're going to have higher capacity on the line because the temperature is cooler.
And first of all, thank the audience for their, thank you for your engagement. I think we've broken any question record that I've ever seen. I'll attempt to summarize them. And our other panelists, if you want to chime in as well. What about new to conductor technologies or reconductoring advances as something to consider along with the dynamic line ratings? Any thoughts on that?
So was that a question for me?
Yeah, or for whoever wants to take it. I probably, you're the engineer. Well, you're one of the engineers here. We have multiple engineers here. Yes, please.
So the question is like, how about new conductor technologies? Is that?
Yes.
Yes, I have. We are actually deploying another conductor technology in a small scale, not necessarily large scale yet, but that technology, of course, compared to regular basically transmission conductors, is higher capacity, but the cost is slightly higher compared to less infrastructure, like less towers, number of towers I need to hold those wires up. Actually, overall, it becomes a better solution compared to traditional, transmission or regular transmission wires that we typically install for line upgrades. So yes, to cut the long story short, yes, there are some good upgrades in terms of the conductor technology itself. That we're trying them as well.
Hey, Ted, can I interject a little bit?
Yes.
First of all, I want to apologize. We had a power outage and I lost internet, so I left real abruptly. I apologize for that, but I'm glad to be back. I'm a fan of high temperature, low sag conductors, especially if the structures are still in good condition and have a lot of remaining life. We can increase a lot of capacity on existing corridors, as Michelle mentioned and Babak did too. And it costs a little more, you're right, but you get a lot more. I think you get a lot more efficiency longer term out of the corridor. And I think that's the important thing, is managing the corridors we have today and getting more capability out of that. And that's a great application.
And Michelle, I know y'all do a lot of R&D. Are y'all looking at new conductor technologies?
We're looking at all the above. And so that is one. It's actually my brother organization or sister organization, what you call it. But I believe that is what the focus papers would do. Where do we focus and where do we look at? So my assumption, and I assume they're going to, but I'm not sure on that.
And Dr. Nyati, you had something you wanted to add?
Oh no, I just mentioned that. Yeah, we're already deploying the conductor technology that basically has less sag, requires fewer transmission infrastructure in terms of fewer towers. So even though the cost of the line itself compared to a regular transmission lines may be slightly higher, but overall the project cost is less than a typical transmission line upgrade.
Okay. What are the barriers? What makes this difficult? I mean, that the National Grid demonstration appears to be very beneficial. What are the barriers to the deployment of dynamic line pricing and these other technologies?
Yeah, I think so. Number one is, of course, like we got to look at how we're operating our system. So I mentioned ISO adoption is one of the challenges, and so we're facing larger scale, challenges in the large scale deployment, because the way we operate our system right now doesn't depend on real-time data. It's basically going with the static, and we may do some, go back to our ambient adjusted rating if we have to, right? And so because of this traditional way of operation, the chance of DLR being adopted is difficult because it requires a lot of system upgrades. ISO's database needs to be upgraded. There needs, DLR data need to be transmitted there, so their system needs to accept all that digital data coming to them. So it's a matter of cost. It's a matter of how we're operating the grid right now. But again, if we think differently and look at, so at least let's start with forecast, and then real time can also be implemented for emergency operations. I think there's a chance there. And the other challenge that I mentioned, in general, we got to be very careful with cybersecurity.
And Michelle and Jay, any thoughts on any of that?
Go ahead, Michelle. We're running out of time. So.
Oh no, I'm good, Jay. You're the engineer.
I agree with everything Babak said, and there's a lot of challenges just to getting people to change. It's tough, and the industry is very conservative, and people have lived with static ratings forever, and people are looking at ambient adjusted ratings as maybe an enhancement. But I think you need to be careful, because wind speed is the critical factor on line loading. And if you're just adjusting based on ambient temperature, you may be sacrificing some life on the conductor by doing that. So be careful.
And then with wind speed, that's a forecast issue, right? That also is used for, forecasting of generation, right? So we're getting pretty good at forecasting wind. Would you agree?
Yeah.
Oh, excellent. Yeah. The errors at SPP are, 2-3% now on forecast errors for wind speeds and the power conversion. So yeah, especially near term. Even the wind speeds tomorrow, they're pretty good at it. The challenges they have are some low-level jets or icing conditions and things like that really affect what happens with wind turbines. But wind speeds are pretty good.
Well, each of you give me a minute wrap. Starting with Michelle, wrap it up.
Yeah. Well, so agreeing with all my panelists, we have some big challenges in the industry, and I think really looking at where the technology works, where to employ it. The biggest thing is that culture shift, because the operators, and I must hand it to them, have been beat over the head for years. Don't let the lights go out. Don't let the lights go out. And so with new technology, they're not the first ones to jump and say, goody, because if it's wrong, they're the ones that have the lights go out. So I think my colleagues are very correct. And this is about a culture shift. It's about demonstration products. It's about getting folks in the operators in the industry comfortable, as well as the planners, using this new technology and embracing it, figure out how to embrace it in their system.
Jay, put a wrap on it.
I totally agree with Michelle. We've got to have demonstration projects, research projects, pilots in the field to get people comfortable with the technology and figure out how to implement it in the current systems, how it's going to affect markets, how it affects all kinds of things. But the concerns about compliance or cybersecurity, those can be addressed and have been addressed. These technologies are being used around the world and benefiting consumers as we speak. So let's find a way to get the technologies deployed and sharing the risk and sharing the rewards of this between the developers, the ISO RTOs, and consumers.
Thanks, sir. Dr. Inyati, put a wrap on it.
Sure. Yes. Well, Michelle and Jay, well said. Fully agree with what you just said. The only thing I would add is, so we kind of talked about the technology, we talked about data, market. However, I think the policy needs to also support the deployment of these technologies. And from utilities perspective, seeing some incentives that are provided to the utilities is extremely important. I'm not a policy person, but I wanted to highlight that we've, in the utilities business, seeing, the regulatory agencies providing these incentives to support the deployment of GET technologies is a huge step towards the deployment, like wider scale deployment. And as Jay said, everyone will celebrate and share the benefits. Thank you.
Thank you all for participating in our panel. And with that, I will pass it back to Carrie, I think.